Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. So I want to apologize for not getting my usual second episode up last week. My Saturday episode did not go live. If you listen to the Tuesday episode, I mentioned that I was on vacation. And being on vacation, I was going to try to get my Saturday episode recorded early on Friday, but it was the last day that we were there, so I didn't really want to take time to do that. And then Saturday, we were traveling all day, so I had no time to record. And Sunday, I was going to try to get a quick episode up before kickoff, but I was unable to do so. I came down with a pretty bad cold Saturday while traveling home. So I didn't feel like I had the energy or my voice could support doing a Sunday morning episode. So I apologize about that. Hopefully, my voice will hold up fine today as I'm still battling the cold, but we'll push through and we will be back to our normal 2 episodes a week starting today with the Tuesday episode. So we will get into our first Tuesday segment, Congratulate or Commiserate. I will start by giving you an update on how I did this weekend, and truthfully, week 3 was garbage tier for me. It was just, I went 0-3 in my leagues, and I can live with that in some cases, and other cases I cannot. So let's break it down here. My Dynasty League. This was the game that was the furthest from being close. I competed for a while, but honestly, I just didn't have any big boom weeks. Cam Newton was a disappointment. All of my running backs, Kenyon Drake, Kareem Hunt, David Montgomery, all had meh weeks. Amari Cooper and Stephon Diggs didn't do it for me. DJ Chark was ruled out, so I picked up Russell Gage, who then got knocked out with a concussion pretty early in his game. So just no real big boom weeks. Nothing to put me over the top of my opponent there. I ended up losing by a sizable margin. So no harm, no foul. I'm 2-1 in that league still, so I'm still feeling pretty good. Hopefully Chart can come back for me. And then we move into my 12-team Superflex League. I was looking really good to start Sunday. I had Josh Allen and Derrick Henry just crushing it for me. I was feeling really good. I was playing another 2-0 team. Actually, I was 1-1 going into this week in that league. I was playing a 2-0 team, the first place team. I was feeling really good. And then the late afternoon games rolled around, and Mike Evans caught 2 touchdowns on 2 1-yard catches. So 2 yards, 2 touchdowns. That hurts to get him back into it. And then I had Russell Gage get knocked out. I played him in this league as well since I'm dealing with the A.J. Brown injury. So Russell Gage gets knocked out with a concussion early. Joshua Kelly fumbles in what was supposed to be a super plus matchup. He did not deliver for me, but I'm still in it. I'm only down less than 4 points going into the Sunday night football game, and I have Jared Cook left. So I'm feeling really good. And then Jared Cook goes down to a groin injury early in the game, ends with 21 yards, and I lose by less than 2 points because 2 of my guys got knocked out early in their games. So not the way you want to lose. Losing Gage and Cook, all I needed was less than 2 points combined from them. So if Kelly doesn't fumble, if Mike Evans doesn't catch 2 1-yard touchdowns, or if my 2 guys don't get injured, I win in that league. So I'm commiserating with anybody who lost like that this week. And then my ESPN, my 10-team standard league, I went in 2-0 this week, feeling good. I had dealt with various injury issues during the game. Every week so far in this league, I have had 1 wide receiver go down and not finish the game. So week 1, I had A.J. Brown get hurt. I think he technically finished the game, but he wasn't really playing. We saw Corey Davis dominate that week 1 because of the A.J. Brown injury, and he hasn't come back since. So in week 2, because of the A.J. Brown injury, and I had Deebo Samuel on my IR, I drafted him before he was placed on IR when he was supposedly going to be ready for week 1. So I was already out Deebo, lost A.J. Brown week 1 in game. So I picked up Paris Campbell in week 2, like I talked about. He was the Colts receiving leader through week 1, and he had the great matchup against Minnesota. He gets hurt the first play. So I finished that week down 1 player again. Luckily, I won. And then this week, I have Deontay Johnson, who has been really good. He was third in the league in targets through the first 2 weeks. So I'm feeling good about him. He gets knocked out early with a concussion. I finished the week again down one player, but I'm still in it going into Monday night. All I need is a good game from Mark Andrews. And then I have to watch him drop catches, miss out on touchdowns, and just generally suck. So 0-3. There I was, 0-3. Depressing week. Hopefully we can turn it around in week 4. I'm still 2-1 in 2 of my leagues, and then the 12-team Superflex League. I'm 1-2 on record, but we do a system where you get a point for winning your matchup, and then you get a point if you're in the top half. So I'm 500 in that league, but still, disappointing ways to lose is when guys go down in-game injuries. Can't plan for those. So we will go to a listener who has shared their results on Twitter. It's coming from Bill, and this is going to be another commiserate. So Bill is starting 0-3 as the defending champion in his league. Ooh, 0-3 starts. At least I'm not 0-3. I have dealt with injuries, but 0-3 is rough. Devontae Adams didn't play, and his disappointing group of Matt Ryan, DJ Moore, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling led to a third disappointing week in a row. I'm sorry, Bill. That's rough. Don't give up, though. 0-3 is not the end of the world. You can definitely turn it around. All you need to do is make the playoffs, and you have a shot at the title. You don't have to be undefeated. You don't have to be the first seed going into the playoffs. You just got to get to the playoffs. So 0-3 is definitely doable. Definitely can turn it around. If you happen to pick up MVS over Alan Lazard, I'm sorry. That was probably a painful game to watch on Sunday Night Football. I had Lazard ranked a little bit higher, but it was definitely a toss-up going in, depending on what source you were consulting on who to pick up with that Adams injury. So I could see probably half the people went MVS and half the people went Lazard. So just an unfortunate situation there. Hopefully you can turn it around. And thanks for sharing. So we will get into our next Tuesday segment, high flying or nosediving. I will go through high flying and nosediving players for each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So my high flying QB for week 3 is Jared Goff. So if you watch that Bills-Rams game, it looked like the Bills were just taking it to the Rams. It looked like Bills are going to go undefeated. They're going to win the Super Bowl. Josh Allen is going to have an MVP season. And then with 5 minutes left in the third quarter, I think, down 28-3, here comes Jared Goff leading an absurd comeback. He threw for 2 TDs and rushed for another. It was a fun game to watch. They had a questionable pass interference call that probably cost the Rams the game, but don't go down 28-3, and you don't put yourself in that situation. So outside of disappointing week 1 at Dallas, Goff has been very good for the last 2 weeks and is the QB5 through that time. The best part of this is that he's only 45% rostered in ESPN leagues, so if you need a reliable quarterback to pick up outside of just a weekly stream, Jared Goff is a good player to drop a little bit of fab on. If you're dealing with quarterback issues or you need someone more reliable, you were trying to stream, it hasn't worked out, you need a reliable quarterback for most weeks, Jared Goff is your guy, and only 45% rostered, he's probably available in your league. So my nose diving quarterback is Matt Ryan. It was a rough day for Ryan, who came into the week as the QB6. He was only 19 of 38, which is his lowest completion percentage in the last 3 seasons. This is probably a result of losing Julio and then Russell Gage early on, and that just made it painfully obvious who he was going to. It was going to be Calvin Ridley. He was going to force it to Calvin Ridley. So I would definitely not view Ryan as a weekly starter for now, and more of a streamer option, but if he gets all of his receiving options back, if Julio comes back completely healthy, doesn't have any lingering hamstring issues, Russell Gage can return from the concussion quickly, I think Ryan's still a decent start. For now, I'm not locking him in as a must start every week. He's not a stud quarterback that you have to start every week, so don't feel like that. But I also don't think that this kind of really poor performance is going to be the norm. I think it'll be somewhere in between until he gets all of his receivers back healthy. So my high flying running back is Austin Eckler. So from week one panic mode to 2 straight weeks of domination, Eckler honestly looks like a stud. Justin Herbert coming in has brought the passing game targets back for him, and he's caught a ridiculous 100% of his targets this season. So if Herbert is in at QB, Eckler is a top 10 play, no doubt for me. If Tyrod comes back in, I'd be nervous for Eckler as the offense and his targets overall will suffer. We saw that in week one. The offense just did not look good under Tyrod. He did not target Eckler in the passing game. I don't know if that was by design. I assume it was a Tyrod issue. So if Tyrod ends up coming back in, I would be a little more concerned about Eckler. But if Herbert's in as quarterback, Eckler is a top guy, no doubt. So my nose diving running back is Kenyon Drake. And I see a lot of people on Twitter freaking out about Kenyon Drake. He actually tweeted back after week 2, I think it was, that if you're a fantasy manager and you're concerned about his performance through the first 2 weeks, that feel free to drop him and grace someone else in your league with his fantasy production. But through 3 weeks, his fantasy production has not been that great. He was drafted at the end of the first or the beginning of the second in most leagues, and people are probably starting to worry about his mediocre results. He's basically a fringe running back 2 through 3 weeks, which is not what you were hoping for based on the end of last season, his performances, and where you drafted him. He was pretty much pegged as a workhorse running back. Chase Edmonds was basically just going to be a relief guy, and it was going to be all Kenyon Drake all the time. But his passing game involvement through the 3 games is basically non-existent, which should raise some red flags and really caps his upside. If he's not getting involved in the passing game, I think his best game, he had 9 receiving yards. So if he's not involved in the passing game, he's still getting a good amount of carries, like 18 to 20 carries a game. But he needs to get involved in that passing game if he's going to be that true workhorse back and that true star we saw at the end of last season. He does get to play the Panthers this week, which may be the jump start that he needs to get back to where he was at the end of last year. The Panthers have been atrocious against running backs. Everybody is just crushing them. See Austin Eckler this past week. So maybe this will be the salve that Kenyon Drake needs to get going. And this can calm Kenyon Drake owners. But if he doesn't get it done this week, I fully expect panic to ensue and people will be trying to sell Kenyon Drake, which I don't know what you could get for him. If he doesn't perform against the Panthers, it's not going to be a whole lot. So my high-flying wide receiver is Tyler Lockett. He had 3 touchdowns in an absolutely insane Week 3 performance. And while Lockett is presumably the 1A in Seattle, DK Metcalf is still very involved and will probably end up with more TDs on the season as opposed to the way the TDs broke down in this Week 3 game. Furthermore, Wilson is on pace for 75 touchdowns for the season, which is just absurd and will not continue. So the touchdown rate will come down for Lockett and DK Metcalf as well, but I don't think 75 touchdowns for the whole season is a sustainable pace. It's pretty much impossible. So Wilson's going to come back down to earth. The touchdowns are going to come back down to earth. But it may be tempting to sell Lockett high for like a king's ransom right now. But I think he continues to dominate for the next 2 weeks. He gets Miami and Minnesota, which in my opinion makes him a smash play all the way until his Week 6 bye. So if you hold on to him through his Week 6 bye and he continues to dominate, Russell Wilson continues to light it up. Even if he's not throwing at a rate of 75 touchdowns per season, I think Russell Wilson will still be very good. After that, if you get to the Week 6 bye and you want to try to move Tyler Lockett for some ridiculous value at that point and dodge a bye week maybe at the same time. So like Devontae Adams has his bye Week 5. If you could trade Tyler Lockett and then you're missing out on a bye and you're getting a top tier wide receiver in return, if Devontae Adams is healthy by then, I like that trade. But for now, I'm holding on to Lockett and I am riding him to wins the next couple of weeks. So my nose diving wide receiver is Odell Beckham Jr. Look, I've been against this guy from the preseason, and people wanted to take a victory lap on him in Week 2 after his performance against Cincy, but he just doesn't work in the Browns offense. All you have to do is watch the games to know that Odell Beckham just isn't a good fit there, and he's not going to be returning on any type of wide receiver 1 or top tier wide receiver 2 fantasy value while he's on the Browns. In week 2, he made his day on one long touchdown, but was pretty quiet outside of that. And I said last week that I would like to move him after the week 2 performance because people were coming back on him and being like, oh yeah, Odell's a stud. Look at that week 2 performance. That long touchdown, that one move was great. And the one move was great. And you could have capitalized on that. And I said I would have moved him if I had him anywhere. But I don't have him anywhere because I don't trust Odell. And week 3 showed again why you shouldn't trust Odell Beckham Jr. He had an absurd amount of targets last season, and he was still an absolute dud for fantasy football. So usually targets is a good indicator of who you want to be playing, but in this case, I don't think it is, and I would stay away from Odell Beckham Jr. I don't think I could play him in my lineups unless I was absolutely desperate. So if you can't trade him, if you can't find a taker, I would probably bench him unless you're really, really desperate. So my high flying tight end is Zach Ertz. This is interesting because he was my nose diving tight end last week. And going into the week 3 matchup, he was pretty much the tight end 2 in most people's minds on the Eagles. Dallas Goedert had been targeted more. He'd been more involved. He'd been better. And while Carson Wentz has looked just atrocious through the first few weeks of the season here, Ertz finally had a solid game. And that was only because the tight end 1, Dallas Goedert, left the game with an injury. It's come out this morning that he has a fracture in his ankle. It's not just a sprain. So he will be out for an extended period of time, which I think returns Ertz to his top 5 tight end value that he was drafted at, even with the Wentz struggles. This is basically because Jalen Reagor is out. Deshaun Jackson left this week with a hamstring injury. So Greg Ward's basically the only decent wide receiver option out there for the Eagles, which in my opinion makes Ertz the de facto number 1 target. There's no Goddard, no Djax, no Jalen Reagor. Who's Wentz going to throw to? Greg Ward the whole time? No. He'll give some dump offs to Miles Sanders, but Zach Ertz is the number 1 receiving target in that offense now. So interesting turn of events from my nose diving tight end last week where I was completely out on Ertz to a couple injuries, and he's back to I would play Ertz as a top 5 tight end. So my nose diving tight end this week is Logan Thomas. So when I discussed Logan Thomas after week 1, I liked him because of his athleticism and the volume of targets that he would get. But I did caution that those targets came from Dwayne Haskins. And Dwayne Haskins' targets are not going to be that valuable. But I thought that he could make it up with the volume of targets that he was getting. Turns out Dwayne Haskins' targets might be even less valuable than I thought. Logan Thomas has 24 targets through 3 games, but only 12 receptions for 94 yards and 1 touchdown. Dwayne Haskins needs to improve if I'm going to play Logan Thomas again. For now, Logan Thomas can be a stash if you want to stash a tight end, but I think you could drop him pretty comfortably. He's going to get the volume, but Dwayne Haskins just is not good enough to produce fantasy value for Logan Thomas as of now. So that ends the high flying and nose diving section. I know there was a lot of other standout performances this week, but I just wanted to highlight guys that I kind of surprised me more. And the nose diving section is guys that people had high hopes for, and they just have not returned the last value in this week. So we will move into the next Tuesday segment, Straight Fire from the Waiver Wire. So as we get into this section, I just want to say that there's not near as much firepower as there was last week. Last week there was several running back injuries. There was a lot of good running back pickups. Mike Davis, he came through for you if you went in on him. But this week it's slimmer pickings for sure this week. So we'll get into it. My top running back target is Myles Gaskin. So he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but he is getting all of Miami's work, and he has 15 catches on the season already, which is good enough to put him as a fringe running back 2 in any PPR format, even without a touchdown. Those 15 catches, I'm pretty sure, are tied with Ezekiel Elliott for 4th most catches by a running back in the league through 3 weeks. So he's getting a lot of work. Jordan Howard only comes in for Miami if they're on the 1 yard line. And Matt Breida only shows up in weird passing plays. So those guys are not a threat to Myles Gaskin. He is obviously pretty much a workhorse back for Miami, which it's Miami. So not a super top tier team, but any workhorse back is worth picking up. And his volume just makes him a weekly flex play, if not a lower end RB2. So weekly, I would play Gaskin, and I'd be willing to spend about 15% of my fab on him this week. If I was a really running back needy team, I might go a little more, but he is capped by being on the Dolphins, and that goal line work is going to Jordan Howard. So if Gaskin's going to get a rushing touchdown, it's going to be a longer distance rushing touchdown. He's not going to get the goal line work. So caps his upside a little, but with the amount of volume he has, he's definitely worth a pickup, and he's definitely worth a start in most formats. So other RBs to consider, Jeff Wilson Jr., he may have been picked up in your league last week with Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman being out, but he scored twice this past weekend, and McKinnon is now dealing with an injury as well. So if Jeff Wilson is one of 2 healthy backs for San Francisco, I think he's good to go for a flex play. So if it's Jeff Wilson and Jerick McKinnon, or Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert, or Jeff Wilson and Tevin Coleman, any combination, if there's only 2 healthy backs, I think you could flex Jeff Wilson. Carlos Hyde is another interesting pickup. He might just end up being Chris Carson insurance, if nothing else. Chris Carson got injured in Seattle's game against Dallas. If you saw the play, it was kind of a dirty tackle, and a lot of people on Twitter were mad about it. They called it a gator roll. So it turned out that it turned out that Chris Carson only has a sprained knee, so nothing was torn. But Carlos Hyde may end up being the starter this week, and he did have a solid week 1 even with Carson on the field. So if Carson misses time, I think he's a solid RB2 play, but it sounds like Carson even has a chance to suit up for week 4. So Carlos Hyde might just be insurance if you're the Chris Carson owner. And then Rex Burkhead, he had a great game, but James White was still out, and I just honestly don't trust Patriots running backs ever. So you can add him at your own risk if you want. You can put him in your lineup at your own risk if you want, but he could just as easily get 2 total touches next week and end up with half a point and just torpedo your team. So if you're feeling lucky or risky or really, really desperate, Rex Burkhead is there. So my top wide receiver to grab is Justin Jefferson. He had a really negative camp where beat reporters were all about Olabisi Johnson being the number 2 wide receiver in Minnesota. And that must have had some merit because through the first 2 weeks, we saw a decent amount of BC Johnson and not a whole lot of Justin Jefferson. But the first round talent was bound to break through at some point, and breakthrough he did in week 3. He came through with the 3rd highest single game grade for a rookie wide receiver since 2006, according to Pro Football Focus. So he was an absolutely dominant force for the Vikings in week 3. He had 179 yards, I believe, and a touchdown on 9 targets and 7 receptions. I don't expect these kinds of numbers to continue every week. And we have seen the Vikings struggle in week 2. They were absolutely horrendous against the Colts. So it's not like the Vikings are a current top tier team, but their defense is really bad. So they're not going to be able to just run the ball with Dalvin Cook and win low scoring games. They're going to have to air it out. And Kirk Cousins is going to have to throw to someone other than Adam Thielen. BC Johnson not getting it done. Justin Jefferson has the talent. And Kirk Cousins did support Thielen and Diggs. They both had solid fantasy value over the last couple of years. So Cousins can support 2 viable fantasy options. Just know that this week 3 performance from Justin Jefferson is probably going to be his best game of the season. So don't pick him up expecting another 30-point game. He may not even get another 20-point game in standard, but I would say that he's still my top wide receiver grab this week, especially if you're needy at wide receiver with all the injuries. I don't like to spend big on wide receiver generally, but he could be worth around 10% or more of your fab, depending on how needy you are. Other wide receivers to consider, Scotty Miller came out today that Chris Godwin's now expected to miss a few weeks. So Scotty Miller had a down game in week 2, and that was the week that everyone was high on playing Scotty Miller because I forget if Mike Evans or Chris Godwin was out. I feel like they've both been dealing with injuries. So in week 2, Scotty Miller was like the hotness. He was in, all the experts were in on Scotty Miller, and then he had a down week. I think he dropped a touchdown. If he catches that touchdown, he has a solid week, and nobody's worried about Scotty Miller. He had a good week 1, he had a solid week 3. He's been pretty good, and with Chris Godwin out multiple weeks now, I think Scotty Miller's a good play. If he's available in your league, I would pick him up. Alan Lazard, he came through with a monster game on Sunday Night Football with Devontae Adams out. He's the clear number 2 in Green Bay now, especially if Devontae Adams misses any more time. He'd be a great play in the coming week on Monday Night Football against Atlanta. We've seen how Atlanta's defense is, and let's just say they are not a top tier defense. So Alan Lazard might be a flex-worthy play regardless of Devontae Adams' status for Monday Night Football. But if Adams is out, Lazard is a smash. Hunter Renfrow, with Henry Ruggs out, Renfrow dominated the Las Vegas targets and led them to in receiving with 80 yards and a touchdown. So if Ruggs continues to miss, I think Renfrow maintains wide receiver 2 or flex play value. So you could look at Hunter Renfrow. Brandon Ayuk is another wide receiver, widely available. He's taking advantage of all the injuries that are running throughout San Francisco right now, and he also took advantage of the Giants' terribleness in week 3. So he could be, if in the right matchup and the injuries persist, he could be a good play going forward. His touchdown came from a rushing touchdown. So when the running backs come back, I don't expect him to get a ton of carries, but they did give Deebo Samuel quite a few carries last year, even with healthy running backs. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities. When Deebo comes back, Ayuk obviously loses value. He's eligible to come back this week in week 4. I've read that they might hold him on IR until after their bye in week 6, I believe. So he might have a couple more weeks on IR. So Brandon Ayuk might have a couple more weeks of pretty decent value. My last wide receiver is T. Higgins. He already seems to have more chemistry with Joe Burrow than AJ Green, and he was second on the team in targets behind Boyd in week 3. So he got the red zone targets. He got the total targets, second on the team behind Tyler Boyd, and he looks just to have a better connection with Joe Burrow than AJ Green, who is struggling. So anyone that went in on AJ Green is not feeling good about the season so far. My top tight end for this week is Eric Ebron. The preseason beat reporters for the Steelers talked about how much the Steelers loved using Ebron all around the field, and that seems to be true. He finished with the second highest amount of targets for the Steelers, but that was without Deontay Johnson, and he did catch a touchdown. So his red zone work could keep him as a viable tight end streamer going forward, but I would only spend about 5% of my fab if needing a tight end play. I wouldn't go hard on Eric Ebron. I don't think there's a great tight end option on the waiver wire this week, but Ebron's probably your best bet. The only other tight end I would mention is Mo Alley-Cox. He had that big week 2, over 100 yards receiving, but that was without Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle came back in week 3, and Mo Alley-Cox actually outsnapped him and caught his first touchdown pass. So he may hold on to that top tight end spot in Indy, even with Doyle back. He's in consideration. He's not a great pickup, but if you're super desperate, Mo Alley-Cox is the only other tight end I would consider. And to end this straight fire from the waiver wire, I just want to mention a few quarterback streaming options that I would consider streaming. If you're in that streaming game, these are the 3 quarterbacks that have the best matchups and are widely available. Jared Goff, as I mentioned earlier, he could even be a pickup as a solid starter going forward outside of just streaming value. So Jared Goff is my top one. And then Kirk Cousins and Teddy Bridgewater are also other streamers to consider. So I don't talk about quarterbacks in the straight fire from the waiver wire just because most of the time you're trying to pick up a running back, wide receiver, or tight end to fill in for injuries. And those are the positions, tight end or running back and wide receiver, that you start multiple of. And you could start multiple tight ends too, I guess, in your flex. So I try to focus on those, but just wanted to give you a couple streamers that I think have good matchups going into week 4. So that will wrap up the Tuesday episode. One more thing that I do want to mention, I've seen a lot of news this morning talking about the Tennessee Titans had 3 players and 5 personnel test positive for COVID, and people on Twitter are freaking out. I hope that no games get delayed or canceled. It'll be a fantasy nightmare if any of that happens. Um, but it's just something to pay attention to. I hope that all of the Tennessee players that tested positive can recover quickly and don't have any serious repercussions. Um, and I hope that the NFL can figure out a plan that doesn't involve canceling games because that would suck. So, just something to pay attention to if you hadn't seen the news. It sounded like Vikings suspended practice today too until all the tests came back, but they didn't have anyone test positive, even though there was 48 players, I think, with the tracing technology that came into close contact with the 3 players from Tennessee that tested positive. None of the Vikings tested positive, so the only game in any real danger for week 4, it sounds like, would be the Tennessee Pittsburgh game. And the NFL told Pittsburgh to plan as if the game is happening. So we will see. I'll probably have more updates on that in the Saturday morning episode. We should know what's going on by then. But something to keep in mind for fantasy football if you own Tennessee or Pittsburgh players. So that will wrap up the Tuesday episode. My week 4 rankings will be up on Thursday. If you want to catch the video version of this podcast, you can check out my YouTube channel. It's The Fantasy Football Actuary. My Twitter and Instagram handles are at The FF Actuary. And I have a Facebook page called The Fantasy Football Actuary. So thank you for tuning in. And until next time, keep crunching those numbers.